Today, we're delving into a truly peculiar, you could say an almost unbelievable historical event, the Boston Molasses Flood of 1919. Yes, you heard that right. A flood of molasses, or as we call it, Shera. It sounds utterly bizarre, but this was a genuine catastrophe. Millions of gallons of thick, sticky molasses burst from a storage tank, engulfing a part of the city. So, the first thing to understand is why molasses was so crucial in that era. Well, there were several reasons. For one, it was a common sweetener, and notably cheaper than sugar. Secondly, it was the primary ingredient for making rum. And perhaps most importantly, especially during the First World War, it was used to produce industrial alcohol, a key component in the manufacture of explosives. So you can imagine the demand was incredibly high. To meet this surging demand, in 1915, a company named Purity Distilling constructed an enormous steel tank. Just how big was this tank? It stood about 50 feet tall, equivalent to a 5-story building, and was 90 feet in diameter. It had the capacity to hold nearly 2.5 million gallons of molasses. That's quite substantial. However, word has it that there were some issues with its construction. Indeed, there were problems. It was built in a great hurry, and the man overseeing the project had no significant engineering experience. It wasn't properly tested, no permits were seemingly obtained, no inspections carried out. It was just erected, so it was flawed from the very beginning. Absolutely right from the start. Whenever it was filled, strange groaning sounds would emanate from it, as if it were in distress, and it leaked frequently. Leaked? Yes, the situation was such that children from the neighborhood would collect free molasses from the leaking rivets. The company was aware of this. They even received warnings, but they paid no heed. Instead, they painted the tank brown to conceal the leaks. Remarkable, isn't it? Instead of fixing the problem, they hid it. That was an incredibly dangerous approach, and things took a turn for the worse in January 1919. The war had ended, but prohibition was looming in America. So the company was in a rush to produce as much rum as possible. Naturally, they ordered even more molasses. On January 12th, a new large shipment arrived, and the tank was filled almost to its absolute brim. And then the weather played its part. Yes, this is a crucial point. On January 15th, the weather suddenly turned unseasonably warm. After several weeks of severe cold, the temperature abruptly rose to over 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 4 degrees Celsius. Just 4 degrees? That doesn't sound very warm. No, not by today's standards. But it was a sudden shift after a prolonged cold spell. This warmth caused the freshly added warm molasses and the older, colder molasses already in the tank to mix, leading to a rapid acceleration of the fermentation process. This fermentation produced a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide gas, and this gas couldn't escape, possibly because the tank's only vent, the air escape route, was sealed or blocked due to the preceding cold weather. So the pressure inside kept building and building. And then what happened? Then at around 12:30 in the afternoon, people heard a sound like machine gun fire. These were actually the rivets of the tank popping off under the intense pressure. And then, with a mighty roar, the entire tank burst. Good heavens, the entire tank! Yes, the entire tank collapsed. And out of it surged a wave of 2.3 million gallons of molasses. A wave? Yes, a wave. Estimated to be between 15 to 25 feet high. Imagine that, as tall as a 2-story building. And this wave surged through the city streets at a speed of 35 miles per hour. 35 miles per hour? That's incredibly fast. Extremely fast. It was like a black, sticky tsunami. It obliterated everything in its path. Houses, buildings, and the nearby fire station collapsed. Even the structure of the elevated railway track was torn apart. Countless horses, which were used for hauling goods at the time, became trapped in the thick molasses and perished. My God, what a horrifying scene that must have been. There must be some personal stories from that day. Yes, many heart-wrenching stories. There was a woman, Bridget Clougherty. Her entire house was demolished, and she was killed, buried under the rubble. Her son somehow managed to save his other siblings. At the fire station, a firefighter named George Leahy was engulfed by the molasses and drowned. Tragic. But there was also a hero, a railway brakeman named Royal Albert Lehman. He saw that the track was destroyed, so he ran to signal an oncoming train, managing to stop it just in time and preventing an even greater disaster. So how must the rescue efforts have proceeded? It sounds incredibly difficult. It was immensely difficult. Efforts began immediately. A U.S. Navy ship, the USS Nantucket, was docked nearby, and over 100 of its sailors rushed to help. Police, firefighters, the Red Cross, and ordinary citizens all pitched in. But the Molasses was knee-deep, sticky, and as it cooled, it began to harden. Moving through it, searching for people and extracting them from the debris was an extremely challenging task. So what was the total loss of life? In total, 21 people were killed and about 150 were injured. And the cleanup of the city, how was that managed? It must have stuck to everything. It took weeks to clean up. It's estimated that some 87,000 man-hours were spent on this task. Seawater was brought in by fireboats to wash the streets, and sand was spread to absorb the molasses. In basements and other places where it had solidified, it had to be chipped and sawed away. For months, the waters of Boston Harbor remained brown, and during the summer, the sweet, cloying smell of molasses lingered in the air. Good Lord. So was there an investigation? Who was held responsible? Yes, an investigation was launched, but it wasn't a quick process. It lasted for 6 years, and over 3,000 witnesses were heard. Ultimately, a special auditor, Colonel Hugh Ogden, concluded that the tank had collapsed due to structural failure, meaning it was inherently flawed in its construction. What were the defects? The steel used was too thin and of poor quality. The rivets were inadequate. There were design flaws. And above all, there was gross negligence in its construction. No testing had been done. So what happened to the company? A massive lawsuit ensued, the largest class action lawsuit in Massachusetts history at the time, and the verdict went against the company. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company was ordered to pay damages to the victims' families and to the city. In today's currency, this sum would amount to many millions of dollars. So the matter ended with a payout? No, it wasn't just about the money. The impact of this event and the subsequent legal case was far-reaching and profound. It led to a much greater emphasis on public safety. Massachusetts and subsequently other states enacted much stricter laws for construction, such as, for instance, regular licensing and certification became mandatory for engineers and architects. The scrutiny of construction plans was significantly tightened. Corporations, large companies, were made more accountable for public safety. It was, in a way, the end of an era when companies could simply focus on profit and disregard safety, often without any significant governmental oversight. So, this Boston Molasses flood wasn't just a bizarre tragedy. It was also a monumental lesson. It showed just how horrific the consequences can be when safety standards are ignored, when profit becomes more important than human life. Absolutely. It very clearly highlights the importance of corporate responsibility and governmental oversight. Indeed. And perhaps a thought for us today is this. In our current fast-paced world, where technology and industries are changing so rapidly, are we truly learning the lessons about public safety and corporate responsibility from this sticky mistake of the past? Or are we perhaps in danger of repeating it?